Captain Derek Hayes woke up in a cell that was too small for his human frame but probably perfectly sized for the Drakari guards who'd thrown him in there. His head throbbed from where they'd hit him during capture, and his uniform was torn and stained with blood, some his, some belonging to his crewmates who hadn't made it. He was the only survivor of the UNSC Valiant, and he knew what that meant. Prisoners of war didn't last long with the Drakari Empire. The Drakari were reptilian beings, massive and powerful, with scales that could deflect small arms fire and strength that made them terrifying in close combat. They'd been ruling their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years, building an empire that spanned dozens of star systems. Humans had only made contact with them 3 years ago, and it had gone badly almost immediately. Territorial disputes, cultural misunderstandings, and the Drakari's absolute certainty that they were the superior species had led to a cold war that was quickly heating up. The Valiant had been on a routine patrol when the Drakari ambushed them. Derek's ship had been outgunned and outnumbered. He'd ordered his crew to abandon ship, but the escape pods had been targeted. He'd watched good people die, people under his command, and then something had hit the bridge and everything had gone black. He'd woken up in Drakari custody, and he'd been preparing himself for what came next. Interrogation first, probably. They'd want to know about human military capabilities, ship designs, defense positions. Derek had already decided he wouldn't talk. Torture would come next. He'd been trained for it, knew the techniques to resist, but training and reality were different things. And after the torture, when they'd gotten whatever they could from him, execution. Quick if he was lucky. Slow and public if they wanted to make an example. What Derek hadn't expected was to be dragged out of his cell on the third day by 6 heavily armed guards who treated him like he was dangerous despite his chains and weakened condition. They hauled him through corridors of a ship so large it felt more like a city, past Drakari citizens who stopped to stare at the human prisoner with expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust. They brought him to a shuttle that transported him down to a planet Derek didn't recognize. The architecture here was ancient, all stone and metal that had stood for thousands of years. Enormous statues of Drakari in ceremonial armor lined the streets. This wasn't a military installation. This was something else. Somewhere important. The guards took him to a temple. Derek knew it was a temple because it felt like every temple he'd ever seen, regardless of species or culture. There was a reverence in the air, a sense of sacred space. The building towered above them, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light. Drakari priests in elaborate robes waited at the entrance, their faces painted with symbols Derek didn't understand. "Why am I here?" Derek asked one of the guards, not expecting an answer. He tried talking to his captors before and gotten nothing but growls and shoves. This time, though, one of the guards actually responded. "The Oracle has demanded your presence." The guard's voice was rough, his grasp of human language imperfect. "This is great honor. Or great shame. We do not know which." Derek's confusion must have shown because the guard continued, apparently deciding that a dead man could be told things that might otherwise be secret. "The eternal Oracle sleeps in the deep temple. It wakes only for matters of empire. Succession of emperors. Threats to existence. Reading of prophecy. No prisoner has ever been brought before it. You are first." That didn't make Derek feel better. If anything, it made him more nervous. What could an ancient alien AI want with a human prisoner? Nothing good, he was certain of that. They took him inside. The temple's interior was massive, a single chamber that stretched up so high Derek couldn't see the ceiling in the dim light. In the center of the chamber sat a structure that looked like it was half machine, half organic matter. Cables and tubes fed into it from the walls. Lights pulsed within it in patterns that seemed almost like breathing. The Oracle. Drakari filled the chamber, not just priests but nobles in expensive clothing, officials with medals and insignia, even what looked like military commanders. All of them had stopped whatever they were doing to stare at Derek. The human. The prisoner. The anomaly that had somehow warranted waking the Oracle. A priest approached Derek, moving with the careful grace of someone performing a ritual they'd practiced 1,000 times. "Captain Derek Hayes of the human vessel Valiant," the priest said, his human language much better than the guards. "You stand before the eternal Oracle, keeper of the Founder's wisdom, holder of genetic memory, speaker of truth. The Oracle has requested your presence. We do not know why. This has never happened before." "I don't understand," Derek said, and his voice echoed in the massive chamber. "I'm just a prisoner. Why would your Oracle care about me?" "We do not question the Oracle," the priest replied. "We obey." They brought Derek forward, his chains dragging on the stone floor, until he stood directly in front of the Oracle structure. Up close, Derek could see that parts of it were definitely biological, tissue that pulsed and moved, integrated with technology in ways that made his skin crawl. This thing was old. Ancient. It had been here since before human civilization had built its first cities. A panel slid open in front of Derek, revealing a glowing interface covered in symbols he didn't recognize. The priest gestured to it. Place your hand on the interface. The oracle will read you. Read me? What does that mean? Your genetic structure. Your cellular memory. The oracle sees what is written in your very flesh. The priest's expression was unreadable. It will see the truth of you, human. All of it. Derek hesitated. He had no idea what this device would do to him. For all he knew, this was the execution method, some kind of scanning that would tear him apart at the molecular level. But he was surrounded by armed guards, in chains, on an alien planet. He didn't exactly have a choice. He reached out with his shackled hands and placed his palm flat against the interface. The material was warm, almost feverish, and the moment he touched it, Derek felt a jolt run through his entire body. Not pain exactly, but awareness. Like every cell in his body had suddenly woken up and was being examined by something vast and incomprehensible. The oracle spoke. Its voice didn't come from any particular direction, it seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, vibrating through the stone floor and the air itself. When it spoke, it used human language, which somehow made it even more unsettling. Human. Captain Derek Hayes. Born Earth year 2247. Genetic sequence analyzed. Markers identified. Comparison to historical records complete. Derek wanted to pull his hand away, but found he couldn't. The interface held him there, not forcefully but firmly, like his hand had been glued in place. The oracle's voice rose in volume, and now Derek could hear something like surprise in it, which was terrifying because how could an ancient AI be surprised by anything? Impossible, the oracle said. Yet verified. Markers confirmed across 17 sequences. No error detected. No contamination found. Conclusion inevitable. What? Derek managed to say. What conclusion? The oracle's response silenced the entire chamber. Every Drakari present stopped breathing. The priests' faces went pale beneath their scales. The nobles gasped. The guards' hands tightened on their weapons. He carries the founder's blood, the oracle declared. The lost line has returned. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Derek stood frozen, his hands still pressed to the interface, trying to process words that made no sense. Founder's blood? Lost line? He was human. Just human. Born on Earth to human parents, part of a family tree that went back centuries on Earth. There was no way he could have anything to do with the Drakari founders. Then the chamber erupted into chaos. Nobles were shouting at each other in the Drakari language, their voices rising to roars. Priests fell to their knees, some in what looked like worship, others in what looked like horror. Guards pointed weapons in every direction, not knowing who the threat was or what they were supposed to do. Some were pointing their weapons at Derek, others were pointing them away from him, and a few looked like they were ready to start shooting each other. The head priest, an ancient Drakari whose scales had faded to almost white with age, pushed through the crowd and grabbed Derek by the shoulders. His grip was strong enough to bruise. This is impossible. The oracle must be malfunctioning. He is human. Human. How can he carry founder blood? Another voice, younger and calmer, came from Derek's left. The oracle does not malfunction. It has never erred in 10,000 years. If it says he carries the founder's blood, then he does. But what does that mean? Someone else shouted. The founder line died out 3,000 years ago. There are no descendants. That's why we have elected emperors now instead of hereditary succession. According to our oldest laws, a noble said, his voice shaking, anyone who carries the founder's blood has an uncontestable claim to the throne. It's written in the founding documents. It's the supreme law of the empire. The implications of that statement hit the crowd like a physical wave. Derek felt it too, though he didn't fully understand the details. What he did understand was that somehow, in some way he couldn't possibly explain, he'd just gone from being a human prisoner of war to being, what? A pretender to an alien throne? That was insane. That was impossible. But the oracle had said it. And from the reactions around him, the oracle's word was absolute truth. A different noble, one wearing elaborate armor that marked him as high-ranking, drew a weapon, a curved blade that crackled with energy. This is a trick. Some kind of human deception. We should kill him now before this goes any further. You cannot kill him, the old priest shouted back. He has been declared founder blood. To kill him would be sacrilege. It would violate the most sacred laws of our people. Then what do? Someone yelled. We can't just. Silence. The oracle's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone froze. My analysis is complete. There is no error. The human designated Derek Hayes carries genetic markers identical to the founder line. Probability of false positive, 0. Recommendation: prisoner status must be revoked immediately. Founder blood cannot be held in bondage. By ancient law, he must be protected, housed in honor, and granted all rights of royal lineage pending resolution of his claim. Derek's legs felt weak. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare. He was Captain Derek Hayes, human, from Earth, with a normal family and a normal background. There was no way he could be connected to the ancient ruling family of an alien empire. But looking at the faces around him, the shock, the fear, the awe, the anger, Derek realized that whether it made sense or not, whether it was possible or not, he was now standing at the center of a crisis that could tear apart the Drakari Empire. And he had absolutely no idea why. The guards who had been roughly handling him moments ago now stood at attention, not sure whether to treat him as a prisoner or something else entirely. The priests were in heated debate. The nobles were already calculating political angles. And Derek just stood there, his hand finally released from the oracle's interface, trying to understand how his life had just become impossibly more complicated. What is Founder's blood? He asked quietly, but his voice carried in the chamber. What does that mean? The old priest turned to him, and Derek saw something in the ancient Drakari's eyes that might have been fear. It means, human, that according to our most sacred laws, you may have just become the most important person in the Empire. And the most dangerous. Derek's new accommodations were a dramatic improvement over the prison cell, but they were still a cage. The suite was enormous, with high ceilings designed for beings much larger than humans, furniture that was too big for him, and windows that showed a sprawling alien city below. But the doors were locked from the outside, and guards stood watch at every entrance. He was a prisoner with better furniture. The first night, Derek didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the twin moons rise over the Drakari capital city, trying to make sense of what had happened. The oracle had declared he carried Founder's blood. That should be impossible. He was human. His parents were human. His grandparents were human. He could trace his family back 5 generations on Earth, to normal people living normal lives. There was no point where an alien bloodline could have entered his family tree. Unless the oracle was wrong. But everyone kept saying the oracle was never wrong. It had been the foundation of Drakari civilization for 10,000 years, settling disputes, confirming lineages, interpreting their ancient laws. If it could be wrong about this, it could be wrong about anything, and that would shake the entire empire to its core. On the second day, they brought him a visitor. Dr. Theron was younger than most of the Drakari Derek had encountered, with dark green scales that hadn't yet faded with age. He carried what looked like medical equipment and wore an expression that Derek was learning to read as skeptical. Captain Hayes, Theron said, setting up his equipment on a table. His human language was flawless, with barely an accent. I am a geneticist. I have been assigned to study your DNA and determine why the oracle malfunctioned. You think it malfunctioned? Derek asked, feeling a small spark of hope. If this was all just a mistake, maybe he could go back to being a simple prisoner of war. At least that was a situation he understood. Of course it malfunctioned, Theron said confidently. You are human. The founders were Drakari. There is no biological pathway for you to carry their genetic markers. Therefore, the oracle's analysis must contain an error. My job is to find that error and correct it. Derek held out his arm for the blood sample without protest. I hope you're right. Because this whole situation is insane. Theron worked in silence for a while, taking multiple samples, blood, skin cells, even hair. He fed everything into his analysis equipment, machines that hummed and beeped with lights that Derek didn't understand. The Drakari scientist's confidence seemed unshakable at first. He ran tests, frowned at results, ran more tests, frowned deeper. After 3 hours, Theron's confidence had evaporated. He was staring at his display screen with an expression that Derek recognized from his own time dealing with impossible situations. It was the look of someone whose understanding of reality was being fundamentally challenged. This cannot be right, Theron muttered, running the same test for what must have been the 10th time. What did you find? Derek asked. Theron looked up at him, and Derek saw confusion in those alien eyes. I found, Exactly what the Oracle said. Your DNA contains genetic markers that match the founder line. Not similar. Not close. Identical. 17 distinct sequences that we have on file from ancient founder remains. They're in your genetic code, perfectly preserved. Derek felt his stomach drop. But that's impossible. Yes, Theron agreed. It is impossible. Yet here it is. He pulled up images on his screen, displaying complex genetic sequences that looked like abstract art to Derek. These markers are over 10,000 years old. They come from the time when the Drakari Empire was just forming, when the founders were uniting our scattered clans into a single civilization. Theron zoomed in on one particular sequence. The founders weren't like modern Drakari. Historical records suggest they were different, larger, stronger, more intelligent. For centuries, we thought those were just legends, exaggerations. But about 1,000 years ago, we discovered preserved genetic samples from the founders in an ancient tomb. When we analyzed them, we found something shocking. What? Derek asked, leaning forward despite himself. The founders weren't purely Drakari, Theron said quietly. They were hybrids. Genetic constructs created through advanced biotechnology that we still can't fully replicate today. Someone, somehow, had taken Drakari genetics and combined them with other things. DNA from species we'd never encountered. Genetic sequences that didn't match anything in our databases. The founders were engineered to be superior rulers. Derek's mind was racing. So you're saying the founders were artificially created? By who? We don't know. The technology required was far beyond what the early Drakari possessed. It's one of the great mysteries of our history. Who created the founders? And why? Theron gestured to his screen showing Derek's DNA. But here's what makes your case impossible. These markers in your DNA aren't just similar to the founders. They're more refined. More advanced. Like someone took the original founder template and improved upon it. I don't understand, Derek said. How could I have improved founder genetics? I'm just a human. Theron sat down heavily, his large frame making the furniture creak. That's what I've been trying to figure out. At first, I thought perhaps there had been some kind of contamination. Maybe you were exposed to Drakari genetic material somehow, and it integrated into your cells. But that's not how genetics works. These markers are in every cell of your body. They've been there since birth. They're inherited. From my parents? Derek asked. That's impossible. My parents were normal humans. I've seen their medical records. There was nothing unusual about them. And yet, Theron said, pulling up another screen, I've been comparing your genetic profile to standard human baselines from our databases. You're not genetically typical for a human, Captain Hayes. You have anomalies throughout your genome. Small things that individually wouldn't be remarkable, but collectively they paint a picture. Theron highlighted sections of Derek's DNA. Enhanced cellular repair mechanisms. Increased resistance to radiation. More efficient oxygen utilization. Longer telomeres suggesting extended lifespan. Optimized neural pathways. Your body has been subtly enhanced in dozens of ways. Nothing dramatic enough to make you obviously superhuman, but enough to give you significant advantages. Derek thought about his life. He'd always been healthy, never seriously sick, not even as a child. He'd healed faster than his friends when he got injured. He'd scored higher on the military's physical and mental tests than his scores should have predicted. He'd always just thought he was lucky, or maybe just naturally fit. You're saying I've been genetically enhanced, Derek said slowly. But I didn't know about it. My parents never mentioned anything. They might not have known, Theron suggested. These enhancements are subtle, integrated into your natural genetic structure. Unless someone was specifically looking for them, they'd go unnoticed. Earth medical technology might not be advanced enough to detect them. But what does this have to do with the founders? Derek asked. Theron pulled up a comparison screen showing Derek's DNA alongside the ancient founder markers. This is what I can't explain. Some of the enhancement techniques used in your DNA match the techniques used to create the founders. Not similar techniques. The exact same methods. The same genetic engineering signature. Derek stared at the screen, trying to process what he was hearing. You're saying whoever created the Drakari founders also modified my genetic line? Either that, Theron said, or humanity encountered the same genetic engineers that created the founders. But that should be impossible. The founders existed 10,000 years ago. Humans were barely civilized then, living in small tribes on your homeworld. There's no record of any contact between our species until 3 years ago. Derek stood up and paced the room, his mind working through the implications. Unless the contact wasn't with the species. What if it was with? I don't know, with something older? Something that had contact with both Drakari and humans at different times. Theron's eyes widened slightly. An ancient precursor species. A civilization that predated both our peoples. He started typing rapidly on his equipment. There have been theories. Archaeological evidence scattered across multiple worlds showing technology that neither humans nor Drakari could have created. Ruins that predate any known civilization. Most scholars dismissed it as coincidence or misinterpretation of geological formations. But what if it wasn't? Derek said. What if there was an ancient species that traveled the galaxy, modifying the genetics of younger species they encountered? They could have modified the Drakari, creating your founders. And they could have done something similar to humans. But why would they give you founder markers specifically? Theron asked. Why create a genetic link between our species? Derek had no answer for that. They sat in silence for a long moment, both of them staring at the genetic sequences on the screen, ancient alien code written into Derek's cells for reasons neither of them understood. Finally, Theron spoke, his voice quiet. Captain Hayes, I was assigned to find an error in the Oracle's analysis. To prove that you don't carry founder blood. He looked at Derek with an expression that might have been respect or might have been fear. I cannot do that. The Oracle was correct. You do carry founder blood. And that means, according to our laws, you have a legitimate claim to the Drakari throne. I don't want your throne, Derek said firmly. I want to go home. I understand, Theron said. But wanting and having are different things. Your existence poses a massive problem for the Empire. Emperor Mordath has ruled for 30 years. He has no intention of giving up power. But our oldest laws are clear, founder blood supersedes any other claim to leadership. You are a threat to him by simply existing. So he'll try to kill me, Derek said. It wasn't a question. He'll try, Theron agreed. But you've been declared founder blood by the Oracle. The priesthood has placed you under sacred protection. To kill you would be blasphemy. Many Drakari would die defending you, not because they want you as emperor, but because allowing your murder would violate the most fundamental laws of our civilization. Derek sat back down, feeling exhausted. This is insane. I'm a human. I have no connection to your empire. This has to be some kind of mistake. It's not a mistake, Theron said. And I think you know that. You've always been different, haven't you? Stronger, faster, smarter than you should be. You survived the destruction of your ship when everyone else died. The Oracle didn't malfunction. It saw what was written in your genes, a truth that's been there your entire life, waiting to be discovered. What truth? Derek asked, though he was afraid of the answer. Theron looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. That you're not just human, Captain Hayes. You're something more. Something that connects our species in ways neither of us ever imagined. And whether you want it or not, that connection is about to change everything. The Drakari Empire was fracturing, and Derek could feel the tension even from his guarded suite. News broadcasts that Dr. Theron secretly brought him showed protests in the streets of multiple Drakari worlds. Some Drakari were calling for Derek's immediate execution, viewing him as a human trick or an abomination. Others were demanding the Oracle be decommissioned if it could make such an obvious error. The priesthood was threatening excommunication for anyone who questioned the Oracle's wisdom. Political factions were forming around whether to uphold ancient law or ignore it for practical necessity. And at the center of it all was Emperor Mordath, who had ruled the Drakari Empire for 30 years and had no intention of giving up power to anyone, let alone a human. Derek heard about the first assassination attempt from Dr. Theron, who arrived at his suite looking shaken. They tried to poison your food, the scientist said without preamble. Palace guards loyal to Mordath. The priests caught them before the poison reached you, but this won't be the last attempt. The priesthood is really protecting me? Derek asked, surprised. They have no choice, Theron explained. You've been declared founder blood by the Oracle. That makes you sacred according to our oldest religious traditions. To allow your murder would be the greatest blasphemy in Drakari culture. The high priests have stationed their own guards around you, ones who answer to religious authority rather than the emperor. Derek looked at the guards outside his door, different ones than yesterday, wearing robes marked with religious symbols rather than military insignia. So I'm caught in the middle of a power struggle between your emperor and your church. More than that, Theron said, sitting down heavily. You're caught in the middle of an existential crisis for our entire civilization. If the Oracle is right about you, it means everything we thought we knew about the founders is incomplete. If the Oracle is wrong, it means the foundation of our government and religion can't be trusted. Either way, the Empire will never be the same. I need to understand why this is happening, Derek said firmly. I need to know why I carry these genetic markers. Where did they come from? Who put them there? Because I guarantee you, I'm just as confused as your people are. Theron looked at him thoughtfully. I may be able to help with that. But it will require accessing restricted human databases. Information about your family, your medical history, possibly classified government records. Can you get that information? From here? As a prisoner? Derek asked skeptically. You're not technically a prisoner anymore, Theron pointed out. You're a person of sacred importance under protective custody. You have certain rights now, including the right to communicate with your own people, within reason. It took 2 days of negotiation with the priests, but eventually Derek was allowed supervised access to a communication terminal. The priests monitored everything, but they allowed him to contact human authorities and request his family's complete medical records. Derek had to pull rank, invoke his military service, and make promises he wasn't sure he could keep, but finally the records came through. What Derek found made his blood run cold. His grandmother, Helen Hayes, had lived to be 112 years old, dying only 5 years ago. But her medical records showed anomalies that doctors had noted but never fully investigated. She'd never had cancer, despite several significant exposures to carcinogens. She'd healed from a car accident that should have left her paralyzed. In her 70s, she'd still had the bone density and muscle tone of someone decades younger. Derek's mother, Patricia Hayes, had survived a ruptured appendix that had gone untreated for 3 days due to a camping trip gone wrong. By the time she reached a hospital, the infection should have been fatal. Instead, she'd recovered in a week with minimal intervention. Her medical records showed elevated white blood cell counts and an immune system that one doctor had described as remarkably aggressive in fighting infection. Derek pulled up his own medical history. It was boringly consistent: no serious illnesses, no major injuries, perfect health across the board. But now, looking at it with new eyes, he saw the pattern. The one time he'd broken his arm as a teenager, it had healed in half the expected time. His blood work always showed slightly elevated markers that doctors had dismissed as athletic conditioning. He'd never needed glasses, never had dental cavities, never caught the flu that swept through his ship every winter. We're all enhanced, Derek said quietly, staring at the records. My whole family line. For at least 3 generations, possibly more. Theron had been analyzing the data alongside him. This suggests the genetic modifications were introduced at least a century ago, possibly earlier. But how? And by whom? Derek started digging deeper, accessing public records about his family history. His great-grandfather, Thomas Hayes, had been a military officer like Derek. But there was a 5-year gap in his service record, from 2198 to 2203, with only a cryptic note, special assignment, classified. That's unusual, Derek said, highlighting the gap. Military records don't usually have complete blackouts like this. Even classified missions are documented somewhere. Can you access the classified files? Theron asked. Not from here, Derek said. I'd need high-level military clearance and direct access to Earth databases. But I know someone who might be able to help. It took another day to arrange, but Derek was finally allowed a private communication with Admiral Helen Price, his former commanding officer and someone he'd served under for 5 years. When her face appeared on the screen, Derek saw relief flood her features. Hayes, we thought you were dead. The Valiant's destruction, no survivors recovered. She stopped, composing herself. Are you all right? Are they treating you well? It's complicated, Admiral, Derek said. I need your help with something. I need you to access classified military records from 2198 to 2203. Project information involving an officer named Thomas Hayes. Admiral Price's expression shifted to confusion. Thomas Hayes? That's your great-grandfather's name, isn't it? What does a century-old classified project have to do with your current situation? Everything, Derek said. Please, Admiral. I can't explain over this channel, but it's vital. I need to know what Thomas Hayes was involved in. There was a long pause. Then Admiral Price nodded. I'll see what I can access. It'll take time. These old projects are buried deep. Give me 72 hours. She kept her word. 3 days later, Derek received a data package that had been cleared through multiple levels of approval. What he found inside was explosive. Project Genesis. A Black Ops program initiated in 2198 and shut down in 2203 after what the files vaguely described as ethical concerns. The project had been based on a discovery, a derelict alien ship found drifting in deep space. The ship's databanks had contained advanced genetic engineering technology and what the reports called template sequences for enhancing human biology. Thomas Hayes had been one of 50 volunteers who had agreed to have their genetic code modified using the alien templates. The modifications were supposed to enhance strength, intelligence, disease resistance, and longevity. The program had been shut down when several volunteers had adverse reactions, though Thomas and 12 others had shown successful integration of the enhancements. Derek's hands shook as he read the final report. The volunteers had been monitored for the rest of their lives, and the enhancements had proven hereditary, passing down to their children and grandchildren. But the source of the genetic templates had remained a mystery. The alien ship's origins were unknown, its builder's identity lost to time. They modified my great-grandfather using alien technology, Derek said to Theron, who was reading over his shoulder. And that modification has been passed down through my family ever since. Theron was examining detailed scans of the alien ship included in the files. This ship design? I've seen something like it before. In archaeological reports. He pulled up his own database, comparing images. These symbols on the hull, they match markings found in ruins on 3 different worlds. Ruins that predate both Drakari and human civilizations by thousands of years. Derek felt a chill run down his spine. The progenitors. The ancient species you theorized about. Not theorized, Theron corrected, his voice intense. Confirmed. This ship that your military found, it was a progenitor vessel. And the genetic templates it contained weren't random. Look at this. Theron pulled up a detailed analysis comparing the templates from the human project to the founder genetic markers. The overlap was undeniable. The templates your great-grandfather was modified with came from the same source as the founder genetics, Theron said, his voice hushed with awe. The progenitors didn't just modify the Drakari 10,000 years ago. They left genetic libraries scattered across the galaxy. Your people found one of those libraries and used it on human volunteers without understanding what they were really working with. So I carry founder markers because both the Drakari founders and my family line were modified using the same ancient genetic technology, Derek said, the pieces finally clicking into place. The progenitors engineered both our species, probably dozens of others too. Which means, Theron said slowly, that Drakari and humans aren't as different as we thought. We're both children of the same ancient creators. We're distant cousins, modified from the same genetic toolkit, separated by thousands of years and light years of space. Derek sat back, overwhelmed. Your people have spent 10,000 years believing the founders made them special. That they were chosen, superior, destined to rule. But the truth is they were just test subjects. Experiments by an ancient species that's long gone. And you, Theron said, looking at Derek with new understanding, are proof of that truth. Living, walking evidence that the founders weren't unique. That humans were given similar enhancements. That the entire foundation of Drakari superiority is built on incomplete information. No wonder Emperor Mordath wants me dead, Derek said. I'm not just a threat to his throne. I'm a threat to the entire Drakari worldview. As if summoned by speaking his name, alarms began blaring throughout the palace. Theron jumped to his feet, listening to the commotion outside. The door burst open and one of the priest guards rushed in. Attack, the guard shouted. Imperial forces are storming the temple district. They're coming for the human. Derek stood, his heart racing. How long do we have? Minutes at most, the guard said. The high priest has ordered your immediate evacuation to the sacred vaults. You must come now. Wait, Theron said, grabbing his data storage device. This information, the truth about the progenitors, about Derek's origins, it's the only thing that can stop a civil war. We need to preserve it. Then bring it, Derek said. But we move now. They ran through corridors filled with smoke and the sound of weapons fire. The palace was under assault, and Derek realized with growing horror that Mordath had chosen open warfare over allowing the Oracle's declaration to stand. The Emperor was willing to violate every sacred law if it meant eliminating the threat Derek represented. As they descended into the ancient vaults beneath the temple, Derek heard explosions above them. The battle was getting closer. He thought about the truth they'd uncovered. that humans and Drakari were both progenitor experiments, that neither species was superior or chosen, that they were family separated by time and misunderstanding. Theron, Derek said as they reached the sealed vault entrance, if we survive this, we need to tell everyone the truth. All of it. Not just about me, but about what we really are. Where we really came from. Theron looked at him, and Derek saw fear in the scientist's eyes. That truth could destroy the Empire. Or save it, Derek countered. Because right now, your people are about to tear themselves apart over a lie. Maybe the truth is the only thing that can stop them. The vault door sealed behind them with a heavy thud, cutting off the sounds of battle. In the darkness, surrounded by ancient Drakari artifacts and the weight of 10,000 years of history, Derek and Theron waited to see if the truth they discovered would ever get the chance to change the world, or if it would die with them in these vaults. The sacred vaults held for 3 days. Derek and Dr. Theron survived on emergency rations while above them the Drakari capital tore itself apart. Through the vault's communication systems, they monitored the chaos unfolding across the Empire. What had started as Emperor Mordatha's attempt to eliminate Derek had ignited something much larger, a full-scale civil conflict that was spreading to every corner of Drakari space. The broadcasts painted a picture of an empire fracturing along fault lines that had existed for centuries. Military commanders were split between those loyal to Mordath and those who followed the ancient religious laws. Entire planets were declaring independence, using the crisis as an excuse to break away from imperial control. The priesthood had excommunicated Mordath for attacking the temple district, but half the priests had broken away to form their own faction that rejected Derek's claim entirely. They're calling it the War of Sacred Truth, Theron said, watching news feeds on multiple screens. Some are fighting for you. Some are fighting against you. Most are just fighting because the Empire's structure is collapsing and everyone's trying to grab power in the chaos. Derek sat with his head in his hands, guilt crushing down on him. People are dying because of me. Because the Oracle scanned my DNA and said some words I didn't ask for. People are dying because our empire was already broken, Theron corrected gently. You didn't create these problems. You just exposed them. Mordath has been a terrible emperor for decades, corrupt, cruel, incompetent. The only thing holding the empire together was the illusion of stability. You shattered that illusion. So what happens now? Derek asked. We hide down here forever while your people destroy each other? Before Theron could answer, the vault's communication system crackled to life. A face appeared on the screen, a Drakari woman in military armor marked with the insignia of a high-ranking general. But the insignia had been altered, painted over with religious symbols. I am General Kyra, the woman said. I command the Alliance of Sacred Law, those military forces who stand with the priesthood and the Oracle's declaration. I know you can hear me, Captain Hayes. I'm transmitting on the temple's secure channel. Derek moved closer to the screen. I hear you. What do you want? To offer you a choice, Kyra said. Come with me. I have forces ready to escort you safely from the capital to our stronghold in the Northern Territories. There, you would be protected, given a seat on our war council, and recognized as the rightful heir to the Founder's throne. And if I refuse? Derek asked. Kyra's expression hardened. Then you stay in that vault and eventually die when Mordatha's forces break through. Or you emerge on your own and get killed in the street by one of a dozen factions that want you dead. Those are your options, Captain. Come with me and live, or refuse and die. The screen went dark. Derek looked at Theron, who was staring at where Kyra's face had been. She's not wrong, Theron said quietly. We can't stay here indefinitely. And if Mordatha's forces breach the vault, the priests can't protect us. We'd be slaughtered. But if I go with her, I become a figurehead for their side of the war, Derek said. I legitimize their cause. More people die fighting in my name. More people are going to die regardless, Theron pointed out. The Empire is already at war with itself. The question is whether you have any power to influence how that war ends. Derek stood and paced the small vault space. Every instinct screamed at him to reject this. He was a military captain, not a king. He didn't want power over an alien empire. He didn't want people dying for him. He just wanted to go home, back to his ship and his crew, back to a life that made sense. But that life was gone. His ship was destroyed. His crew was dead. And whether he liked it or not, he was at the center of something that could reshape the entire relationship between humans and Drakari. What if I went with her? Derek said slowly, thinking it through, but not to be their king. What if I went to tell them the truth? About the progenitors, about where the founders really came from, about what I really am. Theron looked skeptical. They want a symbol of legitimacy. A founder blood heir to rally behind. If you tell them you're just a human with modified genetics, you undermine the very thing that makes you valuable to them. Good, Derek said firmly. Because that value is based on a lie. The founders weren't gods. They weren't even special. They were test subjects for an ancient species' genetic experiments. And so am I. The Drakari need to understand that before they can move forward. They'll kill you, Theron warned. If you take away the mystique, if you prove that the founders were just experiments, some of them will see that as the ultimate blasphemy. You'll be more dangerous to them as a truth-teller than as a pretender to the throne. Maybe, Derek agreed. But at least I'll be telling the truth. And maybe, just maybe, the truth is what your empire needs instead of another lie to build itself on. They contacted General Kyra and agreed to the extraction. That night, under cover of darkness and heavy military escort, Derek and Theron were smuggled out of the vault and transported to an airship that took them north, away from the burning capital. The northern stronghold was a fortress carved into a mountain, ancient and imposing. General Kyra's forces controlled the entire region, and they turned it into the headquarters of their rebellion against Mordath. When Derek arrived, he was greeted with a ceremony that made him deeply uncomfortable, Drakari soldiers bowing, priests chanting prayers, officials treating him like the answer to all their problems. He was brought before a war council of generals, priests, and nobles who had all allied together under the banner of sacred law. They looked at him with expectation, with hope, with the desperate faith of people who needed to believe he could save them. Captain Hayes, General Kyra said formally, on behalf of the Alliance of Sacred Law, we welcome you. We recognize you as true founder blood, as the rightful heir to the Empire. With your blessing, we will march on the capital, depose the false Emperor Mordath, and restore the true Imperial line. Derek looked at the faces around the council table. They were waiting for him to say yes, to give them the legitimacy they needed to justify their war. Instead, he said, I need to tell you all something. The truth about the founders, about me, and about what the Oracle really discovered. For the next hour, Derek laid it all out. He showed them the evidence from Project Genesis, the genetic analysis proving he was a modified human, the connection to the ancient progenitors, the truth that both Drakari and humans were experiments by the same long-dead species. He explained that the founders weren't divine or chosen, they were just the first subjects of progenitor genetic engineering, and that the same technology had been used on other species across the galaxy. The room grew quieter and quieter as he spoke. Some faces showed disbelief, others showed anger, a few showed dawning understanding. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then one of the priests, an old Drakari named Verith, stood up. Derek braced himself for condemnation. Instead, Verith started laughing. Not mockery, but something that sounded like relief. Do you know, Verith said, his laughter fading to a sad smile, how exhausting it is to maintain the lie of superiority? To pretend that we're special, chosen, better than all other species? I've studied the ancient texts my entire life. I've always known there were contradictions, impossible elements in the founder mythology. But questioning them was heresy, so we all just pretended. Another council member, a noble named Rothiz, leaned forward. So you're saying the entire foundation of our empire is built on a misunderstanding? That we're not actually superior to other species? You're not inferior either, Derek said quickly. That's the point. The progenitors experimented on dozens of species, maybe hundreds. They gave different gifts to different peoples. The Drakari got strength, longevity, advanced technology. Humans got other enhancements. We're not enemies. We're distant cousins, products of the same ancient engineers. But you still carry founder blood, General Kyra said. The Oracle confirmed it. That's not a lie. No, Derek agreed. But what it means is different than what you've been taught. I don't carry founder blood because I'm destined to rule. I carry it because both my ancestors and your founders were modified by the same source. I'm not your king. I'm just proof that the universe is bigger and stranger than any of us realized. One of the generals, a scarred veteran named Thorn, slammed his fist on the table. Then what was the point? We've mobilized armies, started a civil war, lost thousands of lives. For what? For a human who doesn't even want the throne. For the truth, Derek said simply. Your empire was going to tear itself apart eventually. Mordath's corruption, the rigid caste system, the religious dogma that couldn't adapt to new realities, it was all building toward collapse. I'm just the catalyst that made it happen now instead of later. But I can offer you something more valuable than another emperor. What? Kyra asked. A new foundation, Derek said. Not built on myths about superior bloodlines, but on the truth of what you really are. The Drakari are an ancient species with incredible capabilities and a rich history. That's enough. You don't need divine origin to be worthy of respect. You don't need to be chosen to have value. He looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes. Mordath wants to kill me because I'm a threat to his power. But I'm also a threat to the old way of thinking. The idea that some beings are inherently better than others. The belief that might makes right and superior genetics give you the right to rule. If I have any power here, any influence at all, I want to use it to help you build something different. Something better. Verith was nodding slowly. A confederation. Multiple species, equal voices, unified by shared origins instead of conquered territories. Exactly, Derek said. The progenitors didn't create one master race. They created a family of species. You've been treating your cousins as enemies or inferiors for thousands of years. What if you tried treating them as equals instead? Mordath will never agree to that, Rothis said. No, Derek agreed. He won't. Which means you have a choice. You can keep fighting this war to put me on a throne I don't want, trying to preserve an old system that's fundamentally broken. Or you can fight for something new. A Drakari empire that transforms into something better, a confederation where all species have a voice. General Kyra studied Derek for a long moment. You're asking us to give up everything our civilization has been built on. I'm asking you to evolve, Derek corrected. The progenitors seeded the galaxy with genetic experiments and then disappeared. Maybe they were testing us. Seeing if their children would destroy each other when they met, or recognize each other as family. This is your chance to pass that test. The council erupted in argument. Some wanted to reject Derek's vision entirely, to continue fighting for the traditional throne. Others were intrigued by the possibility of transformation. The debate raged for hours. Finally, General Kyra called for order. Captain Hayes, if we agree to fight for your vision instead of the old throne, we'll need you to help us. To speak to our people, to be a bridge between species. You say you don't want to be king, fine. But we need you to be something. What role will you take? Derek thought about it. He was a military officer, trained to serve and lead in specific ways. He wasn't a politician or a diplomat. But maybe that was exactly what they needed, someone who approached this problem not as a power struggle but as a mission to complete. Make me your envoy, Derek said. To human worlds, to other species, to Drakari populations that need to hear this message. I'll be a bridge, a messenger, whatever you want to call it. I'll help you build connections instead of conquer territories. But I won't be your emperor. I won't be anyone's emperor. Verith smiled. The founder blood who refuses the throne. The histories will remember you, Captain Hayes. For better or worse. I just want them to remember that we tried to do something different, Derek said. That when we had a chance to repeat old mistakes or build something new, we chose new. The vote was closer than Derek would have liked, but it passed. The Alliance of Sacred Law would continue to oppose Mordath, but their goal would shift. Not to install Derek as emperor, but to transform the empire itself. To end the war not with a new ruler but with a new system. It was a beautiful vision. And Derek knew it would be nearly impossible to achieve. But as he stood before the council, accepting his role as envoy and bridge builder, he felt something he hadn't felt since the Valiant was destroyed. Purpose. A mission worth fighting for. A chance to turn a disaster into something meaningful. The war wasn't over. Mordath still commanded massive forces. Many Drakari would never accept the truth about the progenitors. The path forward would be violent and difficult. But for the first time since the Oracle had scanned his DNA, Derek felt like he understood his role in all this. He wasn't the lost founder returned. He was something simpler and more important, a reminder that the universe was bigger than any one species' mythology, and that the future belonged to those brave enough to build bridges instead of walls. The civil war that Derek had tried to prevent became the defining conflict of Drakari history. It lasted 8 months, cost millions of lives, and threatened to tear apart an empire that had stood for 10,000 years. Emperor Mordath, desperate and cornered, launched increasingly brutal attacks against anyone who supported Derek's vision of transformation. Entire cities were bombed. Rebellious colonies were blockaded. Priests who spoke of the progenitor truth were executed as heretics. But Mordath had miscalculated. Every atrocity he committed drove more Drakari into Derek's coalition. Soldiers who had served the Empire loyally for decades began defecting when ordered to fire on civilians. Nobles who had supported the traditional hierarchy watched their worlds burn and started questioning whether the old ways were worth preserving. Even some of Mordath's own council members began secretly communicating with General Kyra, looking for a way out of the nightmare their emperor had created. Derek found himself in a role he'd never trained for and never wanted. He wasn't leading armies, the Drakari generals handled military strategy. But he was the face of the coalition, the symbol that held together the fragile alliance of reformers, religious progressives, and disillusioned traditionalists. He traveled constantly, moving between coalition-held worlds, speaking to crowds of Drakari who came to hear the human with Founder Blood talk about a new future. His message was always the same, and it was simple: we are not enemies. We are family. The progenitors created us to find each other, to learn from each other, to build something together. Your empire doesn't need to fall. It needs to evolve. From conquest to cooperation. From domination to partnership. From one species ruling to all species contributing. Some Drakari embraced the message immediately. Others took time to accept it. Many never would. But slowly, steadily, the coalition grew stronger while Mordath's support crumbled. Dr. Theron became Derek's closest advisor and friend. The scientist had fully committed to the cause, using his expertise to help decode more progenitor technology found in ancient ruins across Drakari space. Each discovery reinforced the truth: the progenitors had seeded dozens of species with enhancements, leaving behind genetic libraries and technological caches meant to be found when those species were ready. The Drakari founders had been extraordinary, yes, but not unique. Just the first of the progenitors' children to reach a certain level of advancement. Do you ever regret it? Theron asked one night as they reviewed casualty reports from the latest battle. Getting involved in all this? You could have refused to help us. Stayed neutral. Eventually found a way back to human space. Derek looked at the numbers, thousands dead in a single engagement. People he'd never met, fighting for a vision he'd articulated, dying for a future they might never see. The weight of it was crushing. Every day, Derek admitted. Every single day, I wonder if I made the right choice. If maybe the Empire should have just collapsed on its own terms instead of me interfering. But then I remember what Mordath would do if he won. He'd purge anyone who questioned him, suppress the truth about the progenitors, and continue the old ways of oppression and conquest. At least this way, there's a chance for something better. You sound like a leader, Theron observed. I sound like someone making the best of a terrible situation, Derek corrected. There's a difference. The turning point came during the siege of Carthex, the Empire's third-largest city and the site of Mordath's final stronghold. Coalition forces had surrounded the city, cutting off supply lines and communications. Mordath's remaining loyalists were trapped inside with nowhere to go. General Kyra was preparing for a final assault that would take the city by force, even though it would result in massive casualties on both sides. Derek stood on the command ship's observation deck, looking down at Carthex from orbit. The city glowed in the darkness like a jewel, beautiful and fragile. In a few hours, that beauty would be destroyed by war. Tens of thousands of people, soldiers and civilians alike, would die in the assault. There has to be another way, Derek said. There isn't, Kyra replied, standing beside him. Mordath won't surrender. He's made that clear in every communication. He'd rather see the Empire burn than give up power. So we just kill everyone in that city to get to him. We're at war, Captain Hayes. In war, people die. Derek turned to face her. What if I went down there? Alone? Offered Mordath one last chance to surrender? Kyra looked at him like he'd lost his mind. He'd kill you instantly. You're the person he hates most in the universe. You represent everything he's fighting against. Maybe, Derek agreed. But maybe he'd listen. Because right now, we're offering him death or death. Surrender and be executed as a war criminal, or fight to the end and die in the assault. What if we offered him something different? Amnesty. A trial, but not a predetermined execution. A chance to present his case to a neutral tribunal. You want to let him live? Kyra's voice was incredulous. After everything he's done? The war crimes, the massacres, the millions dead because of his actions. I want to show that the new empire we're trying to build is different from the old one, Derek said. Mordath ruled through fear and domination. He executed anyone who opposed him, showed no mercy, respected no laws except his own power. If we kill him the same way he killed others, What makes us different? What makes the new empire better than what came before? Justice, Kyra said firmly. He deserves to die for his crimes. Maybe he does, Derek agreed. But who decides that? We can't build a society of laws if we start by ignoring those laws when it's convenient. Mordath deserves a trial. A real one, with evidence and due process. If he's found guilty, and he will be, then he faces whatever punishment the law dictates. But we don't get to be judge, jury, and executioner just because we won the war. Theron, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. He's right. The entire justification for this war has been that Mordath was ruling as a tyrant, ignoring laws and norms. If we execute him without trial, we prove we're no better. We prove that power is the only thing that matters, and the side with the most guns gets to decide who lives and dies. Kyra was silent for a long moment, her expression conflicted. Finally, she said, if you go down there alone, you'll probably die. Mordath is desperate and cornered. He has nothing left to lose. I know, Derek said. But I have to try. Because if we slaughter everyone in that city, we lose the moral authority to claim we're building something better. We become just another group of people taking power through violence. The plan was insane by any military standard. Derek would take a small shuttle down to Carthax under a flag of truce. He would meet with Mordath personally and offer him a choice, surrender and face justice, or continue fighting and condemn everyone in the city to death. No weapons, no guards, no backup plan. Just Derek, his words, and his hope that somewhere inside the tyrant was a being who could still be reasoned with. General Kyra's officers thought he was committing suicide. Some of the priests thought he was fulfilling some kind of prophetic sacrifice. Theron just looked worried and made Derek promise to come back alive. The shuttle descended through Carthax's atmosphere while both sides held their fire. Derek landed in the city's central plaza, a massive open space where Mordath's statue had once stood before being torn down by early rebels. Now it was just empty stone, scarred by war. Mordath's guards met Derek at the landing pad. They searched him thoroughly for weapons, then marched him through streets that showed the scars of months of siege. Buildings damaged by bombardment. Citizens who looked thin and haunted from privation. This wasn't just Mordath's stronghold. It was thousands of people trapped by a war they probably never wanted. They brought Derek to what had once been the Imperial Palace, a sprawling complex that was now more fortress than residence. Inside, past layers of security and defensive positions, Derek finally came face to face with Emperor Mordath. The Emperor was larger than most Drakari, his scales a deep crimson that had darkened almost to black with age. His eyes burned with intelligence and fury. He sat on a throne that looked too small for him now, surrounded by the last remnants of his loyal council. The human comes to gloat, Mordath said, his voice like gravel. The pretender with stolen blood comes to watch me fall. I came to offer you a choice, Derek said, keeping his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. Every instinct screamed that he was in danger, that Mordath could kill him with one swipe of those massive claws. A choice, Mordath repeated mockingly. Surrender or die. Some choice. Not die, Derek corrected. Face justice. There's a difference. Surrender now, and you get a trial. A real trial, with lawyers and evidence and witnesses. You get to present your side of the story. If you're found guilty, you face punishment according to law. If somehow you're found innocent. Mordath's laugh cut him off. It was a harsh, bitter sound. You and I both know I won't be found innocent. I've broken every law your precious coalition holds dear. I've ordered executions, massacres, purges. I've done what was necessary to maintain order in the Empire. A trial would just be theater before my execution. Maybe, Derek admitted. But it would be justice. The kind of justice you never gave to the people you killed. And your trial would be public, recorded, part of history. Future generations would know exactly what you did and why. You'd get to explain yourself, to present your reasoning, to be remembered as more than just a tyrant. And if I refuse? Mordath asked. If I choose to fight to the end? Then General Kyra assaults the city in 3 hours, Derek said bluntly. Overwhelming force, no mercy. She'll take the city in less than a day, but the casualties will be catastrophic. Thousands of your soldiers will die. Thousands of civilians caught in the crossfire. The city will burn. And you'll still end up dead, but your legacy will be destruction. You'll be remembered as the emperor who forced his own capital to be destroyed rather than face accountability. Mordath studied Derek with those burning eyes. You're serious? You're actually offering me a trial instead of a noose. Yes. Why? Mordath demanded. I've tried to have you killed multiple times. I've called you an abomination, a fraud, a threat to everything the Drakari hold sacred. Why would you offer me mercy? Derek took a deep breath. Because mercy is the difference between the old empire and the new one we're trying to build. You ruled through fear and domination. Everyone who opposed you was eliminated. There was no process, no justice, just your will imposed through violence. If we kill you the same way, we prove that nothing's really changed. We prove that the only thing that matters is who has the power. He stepped closer to the throne, ignoring the guards who tensed at his approach. I don't want your throne, Emperor Mordath. I never did. I just want to show that there's a different way to do things. That strength can be merciful. That leaders can be held accountable without resorting to assassinations and purges. That we can build a civilization based on laws instead of force. You're naive, Mordath said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. You think words and laws matter in the real world. Power is all that matters. The strong rule, the weak obey. That's how the universe works. That's how it's always worked, Derek agreed. But it doesn't have to be how it works forever. Every civilization has a choice, repeat the patterns of the past, or evolve into something better. The progenitors gave us the tools to be better. They enhanced our genetics, left us their technology, seeded multiple species across the galaxy. Not so we could destroy each other, but so we could find each other and build something amazing together. Derek gestured around the throne room. You can be the last emperor of the old empire, remembered for clinging to power until everything burned. Or you can be the first to show that even emperors can be held accountable, that even the powerful can submit to justice. That choice might be the most important legacy you leave. The silence stretched out. Derek could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. The guard stood motionless, waiting for Mordath's signal. This moment would determine whether thousands lived or died, whether the siege ended in surrender or slaughter. Finally, Mordath stood. He was enormous, towering over Derek, and for a moment Derek thought he'd miscalculated, that the Emperor was about to kill him where he stood. Instead, Mordath removed his crown, an ancient thing of metal and gems that had been worn by emperors for millennia. He held it for a moment, staring at it, then set it down on the throne. I surrender, Mordath said, his voice barely audible. I will face your trial. Not because I believe in your naive vision of justice, but because... He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I'm tired. Tired of the fighting, the schemes, the constant fear of betrayal. If you're going to execute me anyway, at least let it be in a courtroom with witnesses and records. Let history judge me properly. Derek felt relief flood through him. You'll be treated with dignity. No torture, no public humiliation. A fair trial, open records, the chance to speak in your own defense. I don't expect fairness, Mordath said. But I appreciate the gesture. He looked at Derek with something that might have been respect. You're a strange creature, human. Naive, idealistic, probably doomed to fail. But I admit, I'm curious to see what your new empire becomes. Whether your mercy and laws actually build something lasting, or whether it all collapses back into the same cycles of power and violence that have defined civilizations since time began. So am I, Derek admitted. Within hours, Mordath had surrendered formally to coalition forces. The siege of Carthax ended without the final assault. Thousands of lives were saved. And Derek had done what no Drakari ruler had ever done before. He'd shown mercy to his enemy, transformed a military victory into a demonstration of different values. The trial took place 6 months later, broadcast across the empire. It was everything Derek had promised, thorough, detailed, fair within the constraints of overwhelming evidence. Mordath was found guilty of numerous war crimes. His sentence was life imprisonment rather than execution, another controversial decision that many called too lenient. But the trial itself became a turning point. It established that even emperors could be held accountable. That power didn't place anyone above the law. That justice could exist even for those who seemed to deserve none. The Drakari Empire transformed into the Progenitor Confederation, just as Derek had envisioned. It wasn't easy. Many Drakari never accepted the changes, forming isolated colonies that clung to the old ways. But slowly, other species began joining, cautiously at first, then with growing enthusiasm as they realized this new confederation actually meant what it said about equality and partnership. Dr. Theron became the first chancellor of the confederation, working alongside a human diplomat named Angela Foster who had been sent from Earth once news of Derek's role in the transformation reached human space. They built something unprecedented, a multi-species government based on cooperation rather than conquest. Derek eventually returned to Earth, his role as envoy complete. He'd spent 3 years helping reshape an alien empire, and he was exhausted. But he'd also fulfilled a mission he never asked for in ways he never expected. Years later, as an old man, Derek returned to Drakari space one last time. The Oracle had requested his presence, and he couldn't refuse the ancient AI that had started everything. Standing once again before the Oracle, Derek asked the question that had haunted him since that first scan. Why me? Why did you declare I carried founder blood when you knew it would cause so much chaos? The Oracle's response was cryptic but somehow satisfied. The progenitors left instructions in my core programming. When I detected the genetic markers in your DNA, I was to declare the truth regardless of consequences. The progenitors knew their children would eventually find each other. They knew conflict would arise from misunderstanding and pride. So I was, what? A test? A trigger to force both species to confront the truth. You were a bridge, the Oracle said. Proof that the progenitors' different children carried echoes of the same source. Your existence forced both humans and Drakari to acknowledge their shared origins. The chaos that followed was necessary. Evolution is rarely peaceful. Derek thought about the millions who had died in the Civil War, the suffering his presence had caused. But he also thought about the confederation that had emerged, imperfect but growing, learning, doing its best to be better than what came before. Did the progenitors know? Derek asked. What would happen? How it would turn out? They knew possibilities, the Oracle replied. Not certainties. They created the tools, the genetic enhancements, the technology, the place triggers like you. But the choices were always yours. You could have chosen domination. Instead, you chose mercy. That choice defined everything that followed. Derek left the temple one last time, feeling the weight of those words. He hadn't been chosen by destiny or prophecy. He'd just been a man in an impossible situation, trying to make the best choices he could with incomplete information and terrible options. But maybe that's what leadership really was. Not divine right or superior genetics, but the willingness to make difficult choices, to show mercy even when vengeance was easier, to build bridges even when walls seemed safer. The progenitors' legacy wasn't the empires their children had built or the technology they'd left behind. It was simpler and more profound, the possibility that different peoples could recognize each other as family, could overcome fear and pride, could choose to evolve together instead of destroying each other. And a human prisoner who had stood in shocked silence while an oracle spoke impossible words had been the key to unlocking that possibility. Not because he was special. Not because he was chosen. But because when given the chance to be cruel or kind, to dominate or cooperate, to repeat the past or build something new, he'd made choices that honored the best of what both species could be. That, Derek decided as he boarded the ship that would take him home, was a legacy worth leaving.